Hello out there. It's Friday, 6 o'clock. Getting ready for Family Read Aloud. Um, it's April 24th. It's good for me to remind myself of the date because I get confused sometimes. Um, we are going to read a few more chapters of Ida B. and Her Plans to Maximize Fun, Avoid Disaster, and Possibly Save the World by Katherine Hannigan tonight. And that will leave us until Monday. Um, I hope everyone had a fine day today. The rainy days are hard for me. I like when I can get outside more. Um, but tomorrow looks nice, so I'm excited for tomorrow to do something outside, get some fresh air. Um, okay. So when we left off, Ida B is having a lot of trouble. She's upset with her parents. She's upset with having to go back to school. But I'm curious to know more about her teacher. Her fourth grade teacher, Miss Washington, seems a lot different than the kindergarten teacher, Miss Myers, that scared her off from school so long ago. So I'm curious to see how Miss Washington plays out as we move forward, because I think she could be a good influence on her, but we will see. Um, but she's struggling. So let's see what happens. We are picking up with chapter 17 today. Okay. One night at dinner, a couple of weeks later, Daddy told me we've sold the lots Ida B to one family and they're going to keep some of the trees. Maybe they'll have kids your age, babies, added Mama, who seemed to be doing better since she started her new treatments. But it was hard to tell since I was avoiding eye contact and word contact with both of those particular people. Wouldn't it be great to have friends just down the road? Great, I said in that way I had of talking then, a way that used words but didn't tell anybody anything. That Saturday the builders brought a bulldozer and a backhoe out to the land to clear part of the orchard and start digging the foundation of those people's houses. Those people I didn't even know, but I knew they didn't belong here. Rufus and I walked down to the end of the valley and we sat in the woods and watched for a while. I squinted my eyes real tight this time, into the thinnest, meanest slits possible, and sent telepathic messages to the workers like, "Get away! You're at the wrong address!" But as soon as they started cutting down the trees and plowing up their roots, my stomach got sick and my legs and arms got wobbly and my head felt dizzy. I had to get up and wobble run home with Rufus looking at me, smiling and slobbering like he thought I was playing with him. It was all I could do to get to my room, lie down on the bed and cover my ears with my pillow so I couldn't hear the cracking of the trunks and the grind of the machinery. "Sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry," I said in my head over and over again. When all of those terrible sounds finally stopped, I kept lying there just like that for a long time, sick and tired and numb. And then my new heart came up with a plan. Now, up until that moment, ever since the day in the barn with Daddy, just about the only thing I cared about was putting together a plan to save me and my valley. But for all my wishing and hoping and sending out 10 different kinds of prayers for a good one, not a single decent plan came out of me. It was as if all of the interesting ideas and exciting projects that had been running around in my head forever had just evaporated. Because those first few weeks I went back to school, the only thing left in any part of me was unhappiness. It was the quiet kind, too, that doesn't do much and says even less. Every afternoon I'd come home, finish my homework, eat dinner, wash dishes, then sit in the big chair and do nothing. "Ida B, what are you doing?" Daddy would ask. "Nothing," I'd say, not bothering to muster the energy to say the word right. "Well, why don't you find something to do?" he'd tell me in a voice that didn't sound like merely a suggestion. So I'd go and sit on the porch with Lulu on my lap, petting her but not paying any mind, so my hand was thumping on the top of her head. She'd get tired of that and give me a little bite to let me know that I was not giving her the attention she deserved. Jump down and walk away with her indignant tail up in the air as a final warning. Then I'd sit by myself, looking but not seeing, listening but not hearing. Daddy would walk by on his way to the barn and say, "Ida B, stop moping and find something to do." I'd pick my body up and try to find somewhere else to go. I couldn't go to the orchard. The apple trees wouldn't have anything to do with me. And they were always whispering things to each other like, "Did you hear about Philomena? They cut her down, poor thing." "Who'll be next?" What will those people do next? They wondered. If I could, I'd pull up my roots and move to the other side of the mountain, I would. This place is falling apart, the ones who didn't want to seem afraid would say. But the worst was the sounds they made in the evening. Oh, oh, they moaned as the wind and their branches danced together in mourning, and their leaves waved goodbye to the spirit of their friends. I stayed away not because they ignored me, though, but because I was afraid they would eventually speak to me. I was afraid they would ask me, "Why didn't you help us, Ida B? Why didn't you protect us?" But I didn't have an answer, except that I felt like I'd been cut down too. So I'd sit up on the side of the mountain, grateful the stars were so far away you could barely hear their voices. Far away from the orchard and the brook and that old tree, until Daddy would call, "Ida B, time to come in." Then I'd go home, get into bed, and do the same thing all over again the next day. But now my heart had given me a plan. I had a mission, a purpose, and many, many things to do. I'd rush through my homework and lock myself in my room till dinner, then hurry through dishes and disappear till the next morning. I was working toward nothing less than the righting of wrongs, turning evil to good, and stopping the craziness that was steadily and surely taking over my valley. I was Ida B, superhero deluxe, friend of the downtrodden, foe of cancer, meanness, mindless destruction, and traditional schooling. I drew a symbol for myself with the mountain in the background, and in the foreground were the remains of Ernest B. Lawson Elementary School. It was just a pile of rubble, and the only way you could tell what had been there was you could still put together some of the words from its also decimated sign. I was suspended just above that heap of concrete moments after its destruction. My super assistant Rufus had cleared every man, woman, and child out of that building. In the next instant, I had flown straight down from heaven and, with one fist in front of me, rammed into the cupola of the school. With that single perfectly placed strike, I had pulverized the entire place. I was wearing purple pants, a purple shirt, and purple socks and sneakers. My braids were streaming behind me, and I was smiling really big, too. All around the school were apple trees, and all of the kids were safe in their branches, with Rufus eating pie. The brook flowed past the ruins of that school, and in it were all of the teachers, the principal, and the secretary, too, wearing life preservers on their way to Canada. It was a tremendous drawing. I put it on the back of my door, and I didn't even try to hide it. Next, I got on with the part to scare away the new people. I made signs, posters, and notices in paint, marker, and crayon. In our encyclopedia, I researched the most dangerous and deadly things in the universe, and I brought them to our valley. "Beware of poisonous snakes," one poster proclaimed, and there were pictures of some rattlesnakes, a cobra, and a boa constrictor squeezing the life out of a terrified woman, whose eyes were popping out of her head because of the pressure. At the bottom was a man with 2 bloody fang marks on his ankle, whose life had obviously ended in agony. "Tarantula spotted here," announced another, with the biggest, hairiest, black spider standing behind the words, ready to grab you in its humongous pincers. "Tornadoes touch down weekly," read a third, with a picture of a twister carrying a cute little house, a mom, a dad, and 2 screaming children, plus their dog off to who knows where. "Danger, tsetse flies, ferocious, ravenous giant malamute escaped from pet store and spotted in vicinity. Plague of locusts expected this year," warned some of the others, with very descriptive pictures. I knew that some of these things would never occur where we lived, but I was hoping our new neighbors weren't so well educated. I used lots of big words to make them sound true, and I signed every one of them with the police chief's name, Vernon Q. Highwater. They were masterpieces of terror. When I had about 40 of them done, I took my flyers to the building site of the new house, and I posted them everywhere. On the telephone poles by the road, on the trees that remained on the site, on the concrete of the foundation. I even taped them right to the framing that was already up. And I started collecting things and leaving them as presents in their basement. Snakes, spiders, grubs, and slugs. This place was going to sound so bad and scary and look so disgusting they'd want to stay in their house in town and never come live out here. They'd give the land back to Daddy just so they wouldn't have to worry about an outbreak of bubonic plague or orchard inhabiting alligators again. Chapter 18. Back at school, Miss Washington was trying to wear me down. Every day at recess, I'd sit on the steps. Every day, she'd come sit beside me and say, "Anything you want to talk about, Ida?" And every day, I'd say, "No, ma'am." But it got harder and harder to say, "No, ma'am," without looking at her, acting like she was a stranger, like it was really true that I didn't have anything I wanted to talk about. When somebody stops to talk every day and asks you about yourself and doesn't say anything to fill your part of the conversation, just lets you choose if you want to fill it yourself, then it's hard to think that somebody's your enemy or to keep her so far away from your heart. It's hard not to trust somebody like that. And she was wearing me down in ways she probably didn't even intend to. Miss Washington would read to us every day after lunch, and her voice was like 10 different musical instruments. She could make her voice go low and deep and strong like a tuba, or hop, 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 quick and light like a flute. When she'd read, her voice wrapped around my head and my heart, and it softened and lightened everything up. It put a pain in my heart that felt good. When she told stories, it made me want to tell stories. I wanted to read like her so I could have that feeling any time. Miss Washington would read good books too, not silly ones where kids just learned how to behave right. The kids in her books did fun things, brave things, magical things. She'd walk by my desk and set a book on it. I thought you might want to read this, she'd whisper. And I'd just leave it there like I wasn't one bit interested. Then I'd slip it into my backpack at the end of the day. I'd take it out in my room at home with the door locked, and she was right. I did like it, a lot. But I wouldn't tell her. I practiced reading out loud like Miss Washington to Lulu and Rufus, but I did it in my room in quiet so Mama and Daddy didn't hear me. Rufus closed his eyes and looked so happy and peaceful, like I bet I looked when Miss Washington was reading. Lulu got bored fast and started scratching at the door to get out, but I didn't care and I didn't take it personally. I just loved making words into stories by the sound of my own voice. Miss W is what I'd started to call Miss Washington in my head, but never to her face, after a couple of weeks in that classroom. On a Wednesday, during silent reading time, I peeked over my book to see what she was up to. And there she was, with her chin in her hand, tapping her pencil on her desk, and staring straight back at me. As soon as she saw me looking, she smiled, got up from her chair, and started toward me. Now I know what somebody looks like when she's putting together a plan. I could tell that woman was cooking up a big one, and I was the main ingredient. And I wasn't going to have any part of it, because that was what my heart had decided. Real quick, I turned myself forward again and put my book up in front of my face so I would look like I was too busy to be disturbed. But Miss W was on a mission, and she wasn't going to be disappointed. First she sat next to me, and I brought my book so close to my nose they were almost touching. Then she moved her head next to mine, and real quiet she almost whispered, "Ida, I need your help with something." And I got that good tingle up my neck and down my arms, so the goosebumps come out, because she was making soft sounds next to my ear like my mama did. "I need you to help Ronnie learn his times tables," she said, like a cat purring. "Do you think you could work with him? Teach him the way you learned them?" Well, it was like she'd charmed me, and I couldn't break the spell. My hard heart wanted to turn to her and say, cold and sharp, "I'd prefer not to, Miss Washington." Snap my head back forward, and that would be that. But instead, I just kept feeling her voice in my ear and all over. And I was nodding, not making any sounds like uh-huh or yes, ma'am, that might interfere with the memory of that soft voice asking me so kindly for something. That reminded me of what it felt like to be loved. Chapter 19. Ronnie de Kuiper was small and blond and ran faster than anybody in our grade. He was almost always smiling, and if I was going to like somebody, I suppose it would have been him. He was real friendly, even when people were kind of rude, and he never picked on other kids. But he was bad in math. Not in adding or subtracting, but in multiplication, he pretty well stunk so much that every time he raised his hand or got called on, I just closed my eyes and waited it out, because I knew it wasn't going to be right. Sometimes I'd think, man, Ronnie, you need to hang it up. But he kept on trying, and I respected him for not giving up, even though it looked like a losing battle to me. So I was supposed to sit with him during study time and show him how I'd learned the times tables. But I couldn't remember how I learned them, except that Mama and Daddy just kept saying them to me and asking me questions or making me recite them. And I kept trying, and pretty soon I knew them all. I could tell Ronnie was embarrassed that I was going to be teaching him, because the first time I came over to his desk, he just looked down at his feet. Now I know it's hard to not do well at something, and I know it's hard to need help. So instead of not saying anything, or waiting for him to say something, which would be my cold, hard heart routine, I ended up saying hi. Because I felt awful seeing friendly, happy Ronnie the fastest runner looking so uncomfortable and feeling so bad about himself. "Hi, Ronnie," I said as I sat down at the desk next to his, which was the only time I'd said hello to another kid since I started coming there weeks ago. I believe Ronnie was unaware of the greatness of my effort, though, because he just mumbled hey back and was still watching his shoe. Like seeing it scrape along the floor was the most interesting thing ever. Well, if this had been big-headed Calvin Faribault, who thinks he's too fine for his own reflection, I would say he was being beyond rude. But this was Ronnie, and he was just a good guy feeling down. My rock-hard heart swelled up a little bit, even though I didn't want it to. I talked to Ronnie real quietly so nobody could hear us, and he wouldn't get any more embarrassed. Want to play a game? I asked. Want to play a game, Ronnie? He looked at me just halfway to see if I was serious or teasing him or just plain crazy. What kind of game? He asked. A brain game, I said. It's like an obstacle course for your brain. I'm not too good at brain stuff, he mumbled and went back to being fascinated with his shoe. Yes, you are. You just don't know it, I told him. Ronnie, do you run a lot? I run all of the time. I bet if I ran all the time, I could be as fast as you, I said. I doubt it, he said back, which got me a little peeved, but at least he was looking straight at me now and all of his shame was gone. He was getting ready to go. Anyway, I said, because I decided to let that last bit lie, it's all about practice. We're going to have to practice for this game, and then we're going to play, and I'm going to beat the pants off you forever unless you keep practicing. If you practice, you might beat me sometimes. Do you want to play or not? Now, I knew that we were at the point where either Ronnie gets insulted, spits on my shoe and says forget it, or he gets fired up and says let's go. And I could see both ideas were going through his head at the same time, because he was looking at my shoe and moving his mouth around like he was putting together a big goober, but he was also scraping his shoe real fast across the floor like he was getting ready to hop to it. Okay, he finally said, what are we playing for? I don't know, I answered. We could play for who gets to go first next time. Nah, that's baby stuff. Let's play for quarters. Well, I liked that plan for two reasons. I liked that Ronnie was a competitor because that meant he was going to try, and this whole thing wasn't going to be as boring or pitiful as I thought. And I also liked it because I knew I was going to make some money. All right, I said, and I decided in my head that almost every time we played my game, I'd challenge Ronnie to a running race at the end of the day so he could win his money back. Or some of it, anyway. But our races would have to be in private so nobody would think I was having any fun. Then I showed Ronnie what he had to do to practice. We started with the easiest multiplication you can do, other than 1 times anything, 10 times table. First, I showed him how every answer is just the number you're multiplying the 10 by, with a 0 after it. Then I made him write out the 10 times table a bunch of times, and I did it with him so he didn't feel lonely. We had to say the 10 times tables over and over again, backwards too. Then we quizzed each other with just the basics. What's 2 times 10, Ronnie? 20. What's 8 times 10, Ida? Like that till we were all warmed up. After 2 days of that, we were ready for Celebrity Challenge. For Celebrity Challenge, you can be anybody from any time, even from stories if you want. Ronnie wanted to be Carl Lewis, the all-around track star. And I was Queen Elizabeth I, because she had red hair and she was Queen of England without a king or a prince or anything. For this particular game, the first person to get 25 right wins. In the first round, you ask each other just the basic times table questions, but you can switch stuff around a little. You can ask, what is 12 times 10, but you can also ask, what is 10 times 12? In the second round, you can add or subtract a multiple too, like, what is 10 times 10 minus 2 times 10? If you need a sudden death tiebreaker, you can be very complicated, but you have to be fair. You're not supposed to use paper, but I let Ronnie use it the first couple of times, and I did beat the pants off him too, a lot. But over time, I could tell he was practicing at home because he was getting better and trickier. Sometimes he'd want to play even when we weren't in study time, like when we were lining up to go outside and he thought he'd come up with a particularly sly question. Hey, Ida, he'd say, a quarter for one question. Just one question for a whole quarter, come on. But most times I wouldn't even talk back to him because I didn't want other kids thinking I was hanging around with anybody. The only way Ronnie could beat me was if he went first, and every once in a great while he did it. But I never beat him at running, even though I got closer, so it was fair. I'd race him at the end of the day while everybody was waiting for their buses, if nobody was paying any attention. We'd sneak out behind the school and run from the first yellow line on the playground to the back fence. Then I'd give him a quarter, and we'd walk back to our bus lines, acting like we didn't know each other at all. And I almost had fun with Ronnie, but I'd never tell myself he was my friend, because I met him at Ernest B. Lawson Elementary School. I'm going to read one more chapter before we leave off for the weekend. Chapter 20. One day after lunch, Miss W told the class, "I know it's time to read, but I don't think I can do it today. My voice is so tired." She put her hand on her throat and scrunched up her face like something was paining her. It was the same face she'd make when Simone Martini was just about yelling across the room to Patrice Polinsky, and Miss W would say, "Simone, use your inside voice. You're hurting my ears." Everybody looked up from their chattering or worksheets at just about the same time, in exactly the same direction, with the same expression on their faces. A mix of 30% shock, 20% disbelief, and 50% plain old sad. "Aw, man," Matthew Dribble said, right out loud. I felt like the bottom had just dropped out of my stomach and everything I ate for lunch was tumbling around in my gut. "No, my voice is just too tired," Miss W said, and sure enough it was sounding weak and raspy. And we were going to read Alexander Potemkin and the Space Shuttle to Planet Z, too. Well, that's disappointing. Miss W sat down, put her head in her hand, and her body wilted. Like, not only was her voice tired, but every bone in her body needed a rest. "Please," begged Alice May Grunderman. "Please, Miss Washington," asked Patrice and Simone at the same time, with the same moon-eyed face. And then everybody got the idea, and it became a sort of song with a verse of "Please, Miss Washington," and a chorus of "Please, please, please." But Miss W's voice was deteriorating at an alarming speed because now she could only speak in a hoarse whisper, and everybody had to stop with their pleasing just to hear her. "Sorry, but I can't." She paused, and we could all tell by the look on her face that she was thinking hard, so we stayed quiet to give her some room. "Maybe," she said, looking up and forcing a weak smile, "we could have a guest reader just for today." Well, it was hard to imagine anybody but Miss W reading, and we all just sat there for a minute. Then one by one, people started nodding their heads and looking at each other and nodding more and smiling because nobody wanted to miss story time, not even Tina Politi, who usually slept through it. After a couple of minutes of that, people started looking at Miss W, nodding their heads real hard, sticking out their chests and saying out loud, "I think that's a great idea. And yes, let's have a guest reader today." Because they were realizing that maybe they could be the guest reader and star student of the afternoon. They wanted to remind Miss Washington that not only were they superb readers, but wonderful human beings too. Especially Calvin Big-Headed Faribault, who actually raised his hand, and I just knew it was to volunteer out of the kindness of his big, fat, big-headed heart. But Miss W didn't even look in Calvin's direction. "Ida, since I know you've read the book," she said to me weakly, like it was her last request, "could you please read the first chapter today?" Well, I was so shocked and embarrassed, sitting there with my mouth wide open, that I almost couldn't tell that all the other kids were staring at me with their mouths wide open too. Making words into story music like Miss W did was the one thing I wanted to do more than just about anything in the world. But telling a story out loud in front of my class at Ernest B. Lawson Elementary School was nearly the last thing I'd want to do in my entire life. I was so confused about whether I should be happy or scared. I just sat there. Miss W got up, walked over to me, put her face next to my stunned and frozen one, and whispered, "Ida, I need your help." And there I was, hypnotized by that woman again. I was like a dog that would go fetch Miss W's stick, even if it was in a snake's hole under a thorn bush that had just been sprayed by a skunk. I looked at Miss W, just scared now because I knew I was going to do it, but I didn't know how. "I know you'll be great," she croaked. And in my head I was already trotting off, looking for that stick, even though I could smell the stink and the thorns were pricking me. "Do you want to sit there or in my chair?" Miss W asked. "I'll sit here," I mumbled. She set the book down on my desk, brought her chair over, sat down next to me, put her head back, and closed her eyes. "Whenever you're ready, Ida," she rasped. Miss W had given me quite a few books to read already, because it only took me 1 or 2 days at the most to read them, unless I was working on my Terrify the People Who Bought Our Land project. Alexander Potemkin and the Space Shuttle to Planet Z was my favorite so far. It was Rufus's favorite, too, I think, because he was turning out about a quart of spit for every chapter of that book I read. I got tingly in my fingers thinking about opening up the book and reading those words out loud, making my voice go high and low, rough and smooth like I did in my room. My legs were shivering like they were out in a blizzard, and my stomach was flipping forward, then forward, then backward, thinking about all of those people looking at me and hearing my voice. I closed my eyes, put my right hand on top of the book, and passed it lightly across the cover. It was cool and smooth like a stone from the bottom of the brook, and it stilled me. A whole other world is inside there, I thought to myself, and that's where I want to be. I opened the book and got ready to read the title, but I could feel everybody's eyes on me, crowding me so there was hardly any air. The only sounds that came out of me were little peeps, like a baby bird chirping, Alexander Potemkin and the space shuttle to Planet Z. Miss Washington, with her eyes still closed, leaned over and whispered, You'll have to read louder, honey, so everyone can hear. Yes, ma'am, I whispered back. I took a deep breath, filled my stomach up with air, and then made my muscles squeeze it out so it pushed a big gust of wind over my voice box and out my mouth. Chapter 1, I bellowed. My voice was so loud it surprised me, and I jumped back a little in my chair. But nobody laughed. They were listening. The book is about Alexandra, and her parents think she is quite difficult, but actually she is a genius who is assisting the also genius scientist Professor Zelinsky in her quest to explore the lost planet Z. Alexandra gets into some trouble, but really, she is just a very focused person. At first, I was worrying about all of those people watching and listening, but after a few minutes, I left that classroom and went into the story. I was in Alexandra's laboratory instead of at school, and I was just saying out loud everything I saw her do or felt her feel. I let my voice tell the way she did it and saw it and felt it. And I was so looking forward to seeing what happened next, I forgot that I was reading. All of a sudden, it was the end of the chapter, and it was like I was snatched out of a dream, and I couldn't quite recall where I was. I looked around and saw I was sitting at a desk. There was a book in front of me. Kids were staring at me, and I slowly remembered. I glanced over at Miss W, and she smiled and whispered, Thank you very much, Ida. That was lovely. I handed Miss W the book, and we got back to work, and everything was just like always, except that Miss W had to write all the instructions on the board instead of talking them. At study time, when I went to Ronnie's desk, he looked right in my eyes and said, You read real good, Ida. And this time it was me staring down at my shoes like they might disappear if I didn't keep watching them. My throat got stopped up so I could hardly say thank you. Nothing was different except the warm glow that was in my belly, and my arms, and my legs, and my head, and wouldn't go away, even on the long, cruddy bus ride home. That's where I'm going to leave off for today. We'll see what happens next. Pick up with chapter 21 on Monday at 6 p.m. I hope you all have a happy and healthy and safe weekend. I dream of the day that we are together again. But for right now, I just want everyone to be safe. Thanks for listening to me. Thanks for reading along with me. And yeah, just have fun this weekend. Do something fun. Enjoy the nice weather tomorrow. And I'll be back on Monday. Bye.